They say it's the mid-year book freakout tag, but I'm confused because I'm freaking out all the time. Hi, how are you? Welcome back. I hope you're doing well. For those of you who are new here, my name is Svenya and I talk about books. And today we're going to be talking about all of the books that I've read thus far this year. My reading this year has been going really well. I'm having an exceptionally good reading year. Just looking at my Goodreads because my little pea brain can't remember anything. It's like, you read books? Apparently I do. Crazy. So I've read 32 books this year out of my pledged 52 books on my Goodreads challenge. So I'm 4 books ahead of schedule, which has never happened to me because in the 4 years that I've been on Goodreads, I have failed to do my challenge every time. Oh, just kidding. I've read 33 books out of 52, so I'm 5 books ahead of schedule. Look at me, exceeding my expectations, which were already exceeding my expectations. Hopefully it's a good omen of what's to come, and the rest of this tag will go well, because we're going to jump into the mid-year book freakout tag, and I'm gonna freak out about the books that I've read this year. The best book that I've read this year will come as a surprise to no one, is Chain of Iron by Cassandra Clare. So this is the sequel to Chain of Gold in the Last Hours trilogy. It follows the sons and daughters of the protagonists of the Infernal Devices series. If this is sounding convoluted, it's because it is. It's so much fun. It was one of those books that gave me pure serotonin. I loved every second of it. I think the romance is so angsty. It's problematic. It's one of those things where if you hold a magnifying glass up to it, there are a lot of problems, but I don't want to do that. I would rather live in the ignorant bliss, thinking that this is a literary masterpiece. The best sequel that I've read this year is The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. This is the sequel to The Poppy War. The series is a fantasy adaptation of the Sino-Japanese Wars and the British attempts at colonization of China. This was such an excellent sequel. It escalated the story really well. The magic system is expanded, the world is expanded, and the series is really lauded for the way that it examines war and the aftermaths of it, because in fantasy it's really common to glorify war and violence. And this book does the opposite of that and really digs into the aftermath and how people cope with things like PTSD, but also what it's like for civilians. This is really well done. I think it took what was fun in the first book and continued that on, but added extra layers of analysis and depth that made it a sequel that I think was really definitely worth reading. The new release that I can't wait to get to is going to be Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. I'm caught up in the Stormlight archive up to Oathbringer, and I started Rhythm of War. I just couldn't get myself to actually read it when I started it, so I definitely need to finish that, and I'm really excited about it. I love the Stormlight archive. If you watch my top 10 fantasy books of all time, you can see that it's like definitely up there, but I just didn't have the space to read such a long book when I first got it, so it's kind of been sitting on my shelves. I definitely need to get to that. My most anticipated release of the year is the next installment in the Gentleman Bastard series. It's going to be coming out later this year. I love this series. I also mentioned this in my top 10 fantasy series, and I'm really excited to see where the story will go. It's one of those books that I know I'm going to pick up and I'm going to have a lot of fun reading. My biggest disappointment, and this will come to a surprise to some people, I started to dip my toes into the world of BookTok, and I was immediately recommended the Selection series by Kier Cass. I'd heard people talking about it on booktube like 5 years ago about how it was really great. And I was like, okay, well it must have some longevity if it was recommended on booktube when it was coming out, and now it's being recommended on BookTok. People must like this. And I'm confused because it's just the worst. It's the worst. You have this Hunger Games era dystopian setting that has people split up into a caste system that makes no sense. It doesn't add any kind of stake or value to the novel besides being look, there's socioeconomic differences in this world, but you don't need to set up a stupid caste system for that. The romance is so dumb. It's like a fake dating, best friends to lovers scenario that just isn't compelling. There's a weird getting back with the ex thing, and there's some definite cheating. I started reading the second one and just couldn't continue because I was so infuriated. Even as a 13-year-old, I don't think I would have bought into this. I cannot believe for a single second that I would have been like, oh my god, wow. And like the whole I'm not like other girls thing in this book, off the charts, made me so angry. I have so many thoughts on I'm not like other girls, but Leonie from the book Leo goes into it really well, and I think this is such an example of using I'm not like other girls in a way that disenfranchises girls and is actually pretty harmful. So like I'm just overall shocked at this book and really mad that I read it, because I thought that it would be like funny, like haha, I read the selection series and I had a good time, but it made me mad. So would not recommend. I was disappointed. Then my biggest surprise for this year was The Wheel of Time. I was really intimidated by them because the descriptions that I'd heard on booktube at least were that Robert Jordan really likes going into flowery descriptions of things like clothing and landscapes, and he builds this really expansive world, but he does so through a lot of descriptions. And as someone who like really reads for plot, I was scared of it. I was scared that it would be too dense. I was also really afraid that because it's compared to Tolkien, and like the first book definitely is very Tolkien-esque, I thought that it would have a similar writing style to The Lord of the Rings, which I really like disliked. I love The Lord of the Rings conceptually, I love the films, and reading the books after the fact, I'm like, yeah, I respect what they were doing, and I'm so eternally grateful for what they did for the fantasy genre. However, I just didn't like the writing style, and I didn't really enjoy the process of reading them. And so I was afraid that The Wheel of Time would be similar, but I was really positively surprised. They're so fun to get through. The characters are hilarious. It does deal with darker themes, and it does get a little bit gritty, and it's definitely like an adult book, and it's sophisticated, but it's very fun to read. And so I was really surprised at how much I ended up enjoying these books. I have to say that for my favorite new author, it also has to be Robert Jordan, because my boyfriend would kill me if I didn't say so. Fictional Crush. If you had asked me before this year, I would have said Will Herondale from the Infernal Devices series, because he's hot and talks about books, and that was enough for me for the first 21 years of my life. I said, I'm done, I'm sold. My heart is yours forever. But then his son appeared on the scene, and I've got to say, there's some extra spice to James. Will Herondale definitely had like a I'm a bad boy but like it's not my fault type of vibe, whereas James like is more of a flawed character. He takes more responsibility for the things that are wrong with him, and he definitely still has the oh it's not my fault, it was magic like subplot, but he's taking more agency upon himself to be a better person. And so as a mature adult, I'm like, wow, self-awareness. I want some. So I'd give anything for him, and none of you can convince me that he's not real, because in my heart, together forever. For my favorite character, we're going to be going back to the Wheel of Time, because my favorite character that I've met this year is Nynaeve. She's the village wisdom where she's from. She basically like heals people and is the like leader of the women's circle, but she's very young. She's like 21 years old. And the protagonists of the Wheel of Time come from the same town as she does, and because she's older and she's also the wisdom of their town, she has the superiority complex over them, where like she helped raise them and has been like taking care of them when they were sick. And so they go off on this magical adventure together, this group of them, and she's acting like their mom, but she's also only 21, and so the actual adults in the book are treating her like a kid, and she's so stubborn and she's so funny, and she really just makes me laugh, and she's so absurd, but she's also such a realistic portrayal of a woman who's 21 and thinks that she knows better than 17-year-olds, but like also very much is still not an adult. And so she's just like so hysterical. I love her. Every time that I flip to a chapter and it's her POV, I always get really excited. So I love Nynaeve, and I would recommend that you read The Wheel of Time for her alone, because she's so funny. A book that made me cry, there are two that I can think of. There's The Kingdom of Back, which I read recently. I'm gonna be talking more about that in a vlog that I'm doing right now. Hopefully that'll be up soon. The Kingdom of Back follows the two Mozart siblings when they were children, and the relationship between them that grows over the course of the book is so beautiful. I'm a sucker for a good sibling relationship. That's a surefire way to get me to cry. And then the other book that I cried while reading is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This absolutely blew me away. It's such a beautiful story. I went in knowing nothing about it, and that's what I would recommend too. I absolutely loved this book, gave it 5 stars, cannot recommend it highly enough, but it really is an emotional roller coaster. A book that made me happy, The Last Hour series by Cassandra Clare. I can't wait for the next book to come out next year. I'm definitely going to do a full reread of the series. My best friend and I are going to do that together. It's going to be so excellent. That whole series just brings me so much joy. The most beautiful book that I've received this year is probably one of these two. So I collect classic antique books. I think that there's something so beautiful about holding a piece of history in your hands. This is a full volume of the works of Shakespeare. It's pretty small, but like it has tiny Bible text and pages. It has all of his plays in it, and it's so beautiful. The gilding on it is still intact. I looked up the publisher and the edition that this is, and this is from 1860, which means that it's almost 150 years old, and the fact that it still survives and I get to have a copy of it is so meaningful for me. It's not only physically beautiful and looks gorgeous on my shelves, but the sentiment behind it is also so gorgeous, and so these are definitely something that I prize a lot. The books that I must read before the end of the year, I think it would be Rhythm of War, because the longer that I put it off, the more that I'm forgetting the details of the previous 3 books, and I don't really feel like having to do an entire Stormlight Archive reread to be able to read Rhythm of War, because that's just, it's so much. And then I also want to finish The Wheel of Time this year before the show comes out. For those of you who don't know, Amazon is creating a live action show based on The Wheel of Time, and the release date is set for 2021. They haven't released anything official, or not that I know of, and so I really want to finish the whole series before that comes out. It's looking unlikely at the pace that I'm going, but I would ideally like to be finished with the Wheel of Time series in 2021 so that I can enjoy the show when it comes out, knowing everything that happens in the series. And then my favorite adaptation of this year. Did anything come out this year? I don't think so. I guess The Last to All the Boys I Loved Before it came out, and I didn't really like it. It's really frustrating. As someone who goes to Stanford, watching people in books, TV shows, and movies who just get into elite universities is really frustrating, because it belittles the incredible amount of work that it takes to get there. I'm not just saying that because I'm like, I worked so hard, but the people that I go to school with are so amazing, and the amount of hard work that they had to put in to like become such excellent young individuals to get into these academic institutions. Having someone like Peter Kavinsky, who like blows off school and is a mediocre athlete, be like, yeah, I got in on a lacrosse scholarship. Like, it's infuriating, because first of all, he clearly doesn't deserve it, and second of all, Stanford doesn't have a varsity lacrosse team. They only have a club team. So I don't know what he thinks he was getting recruited for. It's the lack of realism for me. Yeah, like I think that's just like a pet peeve of mine with these high school movies and shows. When you have someone who doesn't really work that hard, who like suddenly gets into Harvard, like in The Kissing Booth, when he's like, oh, I go to Harvard. Like, that's not how it is in real life. It's a dishonest portrayal of the amount of work that the kinds of people that get into these academic institutions put in. And I think that that's unfair, because if you want to talk about someone who goes to Harvard, then like highlight the kinds of amazing people that actually get in. Talk about the girl who won the Google Science Fair by creating a renewable way to create clean water in South Africa. Talk about her. Don't talk about this rich white boy from LA who stumbled into Harvard. It's just, I have no patience for it, and it makes me so angry. And on that note of incredible frustration, if you made it this far, comment a little cow emoji next to your favorite book that you've read this year, and I hope you stick around, like and subscribe, and I'm looking forward to seeing you guys soon.